So I'll make that just about half past by my watch, Adrian. So I think we'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar, all about the power of managers in motivating your people. We're delighted that you could join us for what should hopefully be a fascinating 30 minutes discussing all things motivation and employee engagement in reality. Must say before we get going that Adrian and I are really keen for this to be a conversational half an hour. So we are going to be asking you to use the chat box throughout the 30 minutes. And we have left a bit of time at the end for some questions. So fingers crossed we can address a few of those. If there are any that we don't have time to get around to, we are planning on doing a vlog off the back of this webinar. So we'll make sure that everything does get addressed at some stage. So I suppose with all of that being said, lovely to meet you. I'm Adam Wilson. I'm Head of Leadership and Team here at Lane 4, and I'm joined today by Managing Director Adrian. Afternoon, Adrian.
Yeah, hi there. It's good to be on the call. Yeah, so as the Managing Director of Lane 4, obviously get a big interest in this topic, given that I'm leading my own organisation through this. So, and Adam is in the age bracket of the 35-year-olds who we found a little bit more disenfranchised. Quite interesting. I'm looking to get the chat box going quite quickly. So that's why, for me, it's important. But how about yourselves? That if you could put in the chat box what you're up to, what your role is in your organisation, and why it might matter to you right now, and why you're on for this half an hour, you've given that time up. But yeah, as I say, for myself, from March onwards, there was this sort of, if you like, this scramble to try and look at the organisation and keep the organisation survival in the moment. And then it became this ongoing, longer term issue, really, rather than moving from a crisis to a chronic situation. And I think what I found very interesting is that initial sort of galvanizing effect of responding to something was quite useful. But then the ongoing nature of it carrying on, and then people asking themselves, I think during that, as they spent more time doing things differently, spending more time in different environments with different people or very few people, we found that, the question of why am I doing this has cropped up quite a lot for people. So yeah, please let us know what you're up to. And so yeah, just in the chat box, I think people can see different people, small company chief exec trying to motivate myself of a small business, head of HR, what's going on. Yeah, society changes actually is quite an interesting one. You're dead right, because I think people are starting to evaluate and think about what is going on all around them. And I think I've said this before on one of our webinars and some of the stuff I've been blogging about, which is for the first time in a long while, it's almost like we're all in something together, whether you're in business, you're the consumer, you're the supplier, the service provider, you're the customer. We all are experiencing the same thing together in the way we interact in our lives out there. So thank you for saying that. Yes, a whole bunch of people thinking about the people in their team, and a bunch of people under 30. Resilience for an age group is very challenging for that group. So we'll pick up on that in a second. So Adam, if you can move us through to what we're going to be doing.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ed. And obviously such a massive topic that trying to discuss it in half an hour is always going to be challenging. And with that in mind, I suppose there's four sort of key things that we wanted to try and discuss as part of this next 25 minutes. So the first one is around sort of why it might be that younger workers in particular have been hardest hit during the pandemic. And Adrian's going to tell us about a piece of research we've been doing recently regarding that topic. We're going to have a little bit of a look at the sort of psychology of motivation and what it is that drives it. And then have a conversation about how we can equip your managers to better enhance the motivation of the people that they lead. And as always, with anything that we do here at Lane 4, what are the sort of practical tips that you can take away and apply in the workplace, hopefully immediately? So yeah, Adrian, it'd be great to hear a little bit more, I suppose, about the work we've been doing with YouGov on this topic.
It was just a piece of research we commissioned towards the end of last year, actually, as we started to come out of welcoming to the COVID situation. We started to ask about 1,000 people around the UK what actually was happening to motivation of people, and particularly one of the things that leaked out was the 44%. I think it is. Adam, if you move on to the next slide. Oh, sorry, actually, no, fine. We come on to the results in a second, but we were finding there's a difference between the inspiration and motivation of people. And so we were finding that, and this is true of managers. I mean, managers have two roles to play, I think, and one is to create inspiration for people. And I think that at a leadership level, that's pretty much the biggest thing you can do, is challenge somebody's intellect, i.e. give them some information that might stimulate them or stimulate them at emotional levels. So they feel like they want to do something differently. But the difference between that and motivation is that people come from, it's an intrinsic need of theirs to do something. So you can inspire, but it's up to the person to motivate themselves. So when we're looking at how many people are motivated, it's not a question of what are we not doing for people, but it's actually what's happening to them, what are they feeling like, and how are they prepared to make that step, because the motive is to take a step, a drive to take an action. And you know, if you're a small business leader or a business leader with a team of people, you can ask people to get stuck in, you can ask people to ride it with you, but ultimately the step they take, whether it be in their own home or towards making an effort for you and the organization, is down to them. And so creating those conditions, and first, as we said, we've got to try and understand what's going on. So the 44% piece of research that came out was that it was a wide-ranging piece, but the thing that stood out was this age bracket. And it was almost like that being at your best, people found that changing situation, they were struggling with it, and it was over 44% of under 35. So as we've seen in the chat box, a bunch of people, and it's a big group in Lane 4 as well, my own organisation. When I think about how interacting, like Adam's, I'm in the office because I have bad Wi-Fi at home, that's all right in a second, but being in the office, but Adam at home, and then this is how we interact, right? This is how we're interacting with each other. And how do you keep that going? How do I create conditions for somebody to do their best work? So that's been quite an interesting thing for us. So Adam, if you want to move ahead, please. Yeah, so I'm interested in your reflections as well. So just a bit of a flag when we get to the chat box in a second. But you know, the loneliness piece is quite interesting. And I think that during furlough, I think a lot of people have been laid off who maybe in the age bracket, I'm not so sure about people's experiences, but we found that a lot of people in that age bracket were put on furlough. And then you've got a loneliness because people living by themselves. There's something where a lot of younger people, you keep on clicking at them actually through this one, that lack of connection with colleagues, because a lot of social activity for people has been gained through their work colleagues, and actually, you know, being at work, having the chat over the coffee machine, but then being able to go out for a drink or walk to the sandwich shop and making those connections. Because what we've noticed also is people do move around the country and around different places and don't live in their hometown often because they've moved for work, and often that connection with people is not as deep-seated as it has been for people who maybe have been rooted for quite a while. So that's quite interesting. As we see there, distractions at home. Now that could be distractions from, as we know, pets and family members walking in the background, and people just jumping in on calls, and you know, the separation of work and life has been very difficult for people to do. Distractions if you live in a shared apartment, when you maybe got one lounge and a few bedrooms and there's 3 or 4 people wandering in the background with you've got your headphones on, it's pretty difficult. The learning on the job is an interesting one, because I think this comes back to what is also interesting for people, is that ability to, in some micro moments where you bump into people and you get the chance to come into a meeting, you're sort of getting the nuance of what's happening. I think navigating the world of work, there's something, we know that high-performing teams are created by, one of the big pieces of high-performing teams is their ability to learn together and share stuff. And it's a lot easier to share stuff when you're in a space together. And then support. I mean, it seems like an obvious one, but again, that is just the quick conversation about how it might feel. And sometimes I've noticed when you get on the, you know, we've got into this rhythm with online Zoom calls or Teams calls, and we're finding ourselves going into task quite a lot. I mean, I've been working with companies, and you know, here's the agenda, and it starts off pretty hard. How are you doing? Oh, we're doing okay. A bit of joke on the screen, and then before you know it, you're straight into item 1, 2, 3. Was that all right? Everybody okay? And then log off, and then you're on to the next one. And actually, I'm finding people now just don't even want to turn the camera on. Some people are going, you know what? I'm not going to turn my camera on for this one. Is that okay? So I don't know if people are finding that as well, but I think that these are quite important. I think some of that creativity has been missing as well, because that happens when you have these conversations in the sort of informal way. So your experiences, I mean, managing self or managing other people during COVID. I mean, for me, as I said before, I think as a manager, I've been doing updates. I've been doing from home or from here, doing updates on a weekly basis. I've linked into individuals quite a bit, trying to pick up and do sort of virtual coffee with people. Managing myself I find pretty hard actually, because you know, my routine is very different, and that shook me a bit to establish a different routine. And I'm enjoying the kids piece actually. I'm spending more time with my kids than doing the school things, but it's all a bit shaken up. box? I don't know. I mean, you're in this age bracket. How's it been for you? As we look for people to put some stuff in the chat box.
Yeah, definitely. And I see there's a couple of things already going in there around sort of distractions from social media, people who are not actually set up to work effectively from home. I saw something the other day that alluded to us all becoming zombies, talking about being on back-to-back calls, which for me, I thought was quite a nice term. I think, I suppose as one of those under 35 individuals, I think one of the most challenging things for me, particularly as quite an extroverted character, has probably been the lack of variety. Lack of variety in terms of meeting space, lack of variety in terms of those chance encounters, like you said, Adrian. Very much if you're working on a project, it might be that you have a small group who you connect with regularly, as opposed to if you're in the office, you might have a wider pool. And then, the challenges, I suppose, of living in shared accommodation. And again, the lack of variety that brings, right? The fact that you can't all be in the living room on a client call at the same time. So I can definitely relate a lot to many of the things that you said.
There's a couple of things on the chat that I'm just reading through as you did that. This something about the social media. Somebody said put people lean more towards social media, which could be fake or divisive, which is quite interesting because I think that checking your information sources, and when you're in a broader range of people, you can get to triangulate or bounce around different ideas. Whereas if you're channeled on social media, I think a lot of us are aware of this. You've got your like bias. You're going to go for things that reiterate what you know of the world anyway. So your breadth of information, I think, gets stifled or channeled into a place that might not be helpful in lots of ways. I'm interested in this thing, the difference between home and work-life balance, because for a long time we've been looking for flexible working has been coming in more and more and more, and a lot of people enjoy that. A lot of people value it because of different family situations, different social situations. And I think that this has driven it all the way in. And I think there's lots of upsides, as I say, but some of the downsides are you find yourself working non-stop. And because you've done something, you feel like I do school run. I did a school run at 4 o'clock the other day, and then went back online at 8 o'clock because I felt like I had to get through some stuff. And before I know it, that's it. I'm on screen before I go to bed. And there's upsides and downsides with flex working. Being in the office today, for instance, I've enjoyed it because it's given me boundaries, and that's been quite interesting. I don't know if you've noticed anything else on.
Yeah, I was going to set some interesting points around again, the lack of those water cooler conversations. I know that we've been introducing a few different initiatives at Lane Force to try and almost encourage those. The email the other day about this sort of coffee roulette and trying to increase the chances that you do talk to people outside of your immediate team, which I think is so important. Really interesting point around a new starter, not yet met my team. We'll come on to that in a moment around how do you create those sort of social interactions as well as just the task interactions. I don't know if that's one that you've heard elsewhere at all, Adrian.
No, totally. I mean, the one I'm just smiling about is different time zones. I was on a call yesterday with a team. I was facilitating a team, and we did the morning. I was on from 8 till I think it was midday with Asia team, and I was on in the afternoon with the America team, and in the middle we had an hour where somebody was up very, very early and somebody was staying up very late, and we had to cope with the breakfast and dinner scenario. So I think it's quite hard actually. Although having said that, I'm actually feeling a little bit more internationally connected. So I think it's hard if you've managed an international team in some ways, but actually there's less flying around and there's more connection that I can make but you've got to be able to change your frame. I think is quite interesting on that one. Okay, do you want to flick forward again? And if we thank you for the comments, we'll keep on, as I say, Adam said, we'll answer some of those in the questions or answer them on the vlog later. I think a lot of you have seen this. I mean, we did a motivation webinar a few months ago, but the ABC of motivation is one of the Ryan and Decky stuff. Autonomy, belonging, competence, and the meaning, and the reason why. So I think a lot of people are feeling like, I think it's quite, if I go to meaning first, I think for myself, reconnecting to why am I doing this? Because that question is so prevalent right now because because it's been shaken. Going, well, actually, am I doing because it's so different, and maybe not enjoying some aspects of it. They're questioning why they're connected to what they're doing at work. So I think that there's an organization making sure you create that line of sight, create conversations about purpose and purposeful work, because I think that is an important part of the inspiration bit of motivation, but helping people answer that and don't shy away from it. I think it's really important not to shy away from the question about, here's why we in this team are doing what we're doing and what do you need. Then at the autonomy, belonging, competence, the autonomy piece, making sure that people feel like they've got some control. Because there is a lot out of control at the moment where people are determining things for us. And I think that if we, as a senior leader, I've been really conscious of not trying to pull the drawbridge up and assume that I know I've got to shoulder everything. Because if you do that, it takes away autonomy from people, and that's one of the things that keeps them motivated. Because I can pull this company through it as a senior leader, and let me do this, this, and this, and before you know it, you've pulled the drawbridge too high, and you've taken away decision making from people, and you keep on working harder to push that down. Belonging, we've talked a lot about that. For me, you've got to work really hard as a manager to think about putting groups of people together and how they might connect, and different ways from Zoom. I mean, I know we're on it now, but the other day we did a little breakout session with a group and just told them to phone each other in pairs. Just use the old-fashioned telephone. It's really weird. Or go in your garden and do something, on the phone sort of thing. It's kind of interesting how you might have to mix stuff up. And then the learning, the competence. These are all things I think I've talked about before, but they're very simple, really. I mean, and also I don't think making an assumption that people want to immediately go to virtual and digital learning. I think there's some great stuff out there, but there's a lot of stuff out there. So finding a way of helping people learn together and actually navigate and, if you like, curate some stuff that might be of interest to groups, I think is going to be quite important. Is important now as a manager. So anyway, that's just a few ideas on what I think a lot of people know about, but the ABC and the why are quite important for managers to really work on that.
Absolutely, yeah. I can definitely relate to the whole sort of walk and talk. I've been trying to do a little bit more of that recently in terms of get away from the desk, and if there isn't a need to share slides and you can have that conversation, I think getting outside's definitely helped me personally. And I think in that regard, we were keen to share, I suppose, some more top tips around what we have found has been working with some of the clients that we've been working with. And after we've shared this, it'd be great to get your response to some of the things that you've been trying and what's been effective. I think for us, there's definitely an idea, as you said, Adrian, an element of letting go. So recognizing that you can't do it all on yourself and that it can't all be on your shoulders. So very much, how do we sort of empower people and create that sense of shared leadership so that we can drive autonomy? Because if it is constantly people being told what to do in this virtual world, then we know that that's going to affect engagement, and pretty quickly people are going to become not at the best and not performing to the standard that we aspire to. I think we mentioned this briefly earlier around sort of building trust on a personal level. It's so easy just to get into the task, to jump onto the call, look at the agenda and make sure that we hit every point. But how do you as a leader consciously build trust on a personal level and cultivate those social interactions so that ultimately feel like they do belong? And it's not just about the day job, which is obviously critical, but part of that working experience. This one, I think, is probably links a little bit to what I was talking about in terms of my own experience. How do you encourage individuals to build those informal social networks across the business? So encourage people to get outside of their immediate project teams or their immediate teams full stop and connect with others within the business to understand the bigger picture and how collaboration might actually drive performance. And then this one for me, I've been doing a lot of work recently around this sort of topic of culture, and this is one that I think is absolutely crucial. Really investing that time as a manager in helping teams refresh and align their purpose in this sort of new reality within which we now operate, and recognizing that the organization might need to do that as well as those smaller teams. So how do they remain relevant? How do they continue to tackle the issues that we're facing as a result of everything that's going on at the moment? And then these two final points around sort of that competence driver, the first being about encouraging individuals to look at their strengths and how they might play out within this new reality, and just helping people understand also the expectations, the different expectations on their role within this new context. And I don't know if there's any for you there, Adrian, that stand out as being particularly prevalent or key.
I mean, yeah, there's a few actually, but the role thing is really important, because actually there's and the word assumption. I think right now people are making lots of assumptions about what people are motivated by, what people want, and you can't just spray paint people with that. The first thing, and that plays into role, because what was the role before might not be what you're expecting, but people haven't had the conversation actually about what you really want them to do.
Yeah.
And then what is a goal within that? there's been some great stuff in the questions we'll get to in a second, but there's something about aligning purpose and collaboration you mentioned, and people maybe in small teams feel aligned, but the enterprise itself, you're missing something from the enterprise, the whole organization, because almost like you've tightened it up and you're making sure that your near group are happy and healthy, but actually what are we to the company? And so that cross team intra team collaboration, I think, is, you got to work a bit harder on that.
Absolutely. And a really interesting point I've just seen in the chat box as well around the idea of sort of that short-term versus long-term thinking. And that's definitely been a conversation I've been having a lot of, is that there's been a real need for that short-term focus in order to get through this, if you will, and to help organizations survive. But it's now organizations saying, well, what is it that we've done really well as part of this period that we now actually want to continue and take into business as usual? And how do we set ourselves up for that long-term success? I know, Adrian, you've been doing a lot of work at that senior level, probably around that,
Yeah. Well, the short-term thing is an interesting one, because somebody once a few years ago actually told me of a metaphor. And if you're in like a 10-foot pit or a real deep pit, and you can't see up and it's slippery sides and you can't get a grip, so how do you get out of something? And if somebody puts a ladder down, that's helpful. But if there's no rung until the very top, then you can't get your foot on it. So almost like, what's the first rung on the ladder that will help you start to feel like you're making progress? And I think that sometimes when it's deep and you feel like there's no end to it, when giving people the rungs on the ladder, think about what that small, short-term, quick win is. I'm a massive fan of that, because you cannot just go, hey, it's all great out there. It's going to be fantastic when COVID's over. Just crack on. But actually, no, here's and it might be something that might have felt easy previously, but actually recognize it, reward it, talk about it, and say we've done a great job because we've got to that first rung.
Absolutely. And I think another one of the things in the chat box before we move on to sort of the questions was around almost truly understanding your people and what it is that they need. And I think part of that for us is obviously the way in which we look to support organizations in a number of different ways, recognizing that there are different preferences. So very much appreciating there's the need for those sort of bespoke programs, whether that be face-to-face or virtual, and recognizing the need for pace that we spoke about as well. What are the quick wins? So is there anything we can give our people now to help them get through this period? And we've spoken about obviously the need for those digital tools. And I think a big part of us as Lane 4 is making sure that we continue to offer support through webinars like this and some of those quick hints and tips. So I think it'd be great to jump to the questions now and obviously answer anything that might be immediately prompted in those of you who've joined us today.
One of the topics I've seen about recognition, actually one of the last ones that was put up there, about how do you work on the thank you and how it can be seen and experienced in the virtual world. Because if you can, as you say, if you can gather people together in like an atrium like we've got out here, it's a bit easier to, it's a, I hesitate to use the word vibe, but the vibration that comes with people being together and that feeling of celebration, I think you can miss that when it's like this. I'm really interested in other people's ideas. Actually, what have you done to recognize? Because you know, you can get everybody individually on screens, and you can highlight somebody, and you know, narrative is important. You can tell stories, and you can build people. But what you're actually recognizing and rewarding, and how do you do it? I'm fascinated with how people might be doing that. We still do we try and get teammates to notice other teammates, how they made a difference to their colleagues or our customers. That's something we call out every month. Actually, still have that as a program, and make sure we have conversation about what's happening and what's important, because storytelling and cross collaborative stories is where things get shared in terms of what's valued. So I think we need to keep on doing that.
And I suppose a lot of that sharing as well has been, like you said, people getting creative and spotting the opportunity, right? So recognizing that they might not be spending as much of their budget on travel. So what is the opportunity that comes with that budget that almost has been unleashed, whether it be through those virtual conferences, or I know there's been a number of different ways that we've been trying to drive that opportunity to collaborate and to converse. I suppose there's one question here, Adrian, how to spot people who are fading, shrinking.
I saw that. That's really interesting, isn't it? Because a good example of this, I mean, I do a company update, did one the other day, and we've got about 150 people could be on it. And I noticed there were 102 or something on it. Now, people might be busy with clients doing other things, but who's checking in with those people that aren't actually logging in themselves? And I think about some of the faces I've not seen and making sure that, yeah, again, it's the assumption thing, you know, don't assume that people are happy in doing something, but check in. And I think it's care, isn't it? I think ultimately what this is ramping up for me is the spirit of the care that you might have for people that work for you. And I think that's part of the humanity of what's going on for everybody, is that everybody at some point has got some anxiety or some form of destabilization that it's beholden on a leader or a manager to just check in. You have a responsibility to work, and if you're not being checked in by somebody you work for, if you find yourself fading and shrinking, then you've got to make that big step out and I think reach out.
I think, yeah, that definitely, for me, re-emphasises that idea of shared leadership and almost not just looking to the most senior leaders in the business to do everything, right? As someone who's a leader with our team specifically, definitely taking that responsibility on and making sure that there is, we often speak about like cascading, but it's also translating things for people, right? So that they can truly understand it and recognise what it means for them. An interesting one here about minimising resentment from staff who weren't furloughed and have had to cover for staff furloughed while both getting the same remuneration.
No, so Adam, you were furloughed for a bit, weren't you?
I was, yeah, definitely. I think
walking back into this, have you felt that, and have you had experienced colleagues that have had similar things?
I think for me, I mean, obviously the opportunity still to develop meant that it didn't feel like it was time just almost sat twiddling your thumbs. It was very much kind of, what can I do so that when the opportunity to come back is there, there's a chance to do it even better than before. So I think there was a massive mindset piece around, well, what's the opportunity that comes with being furloughed? And then again, for me, it's the point we've made around not making assumptions is massive, and actually having those conversations of how did it feel to be on the pitch, to use our language, working, how did that feel? And likewise, how did it feel to be furloughed? And just having that open conversation so that people can understand those different perspectives rather than assuming. I think that for me was crucial, really.
Yeah, and I think that collaborative culture is quite important, because actually when we played the squad piece, the conversation about, you know, as you say, you might be playing on the pitch or you might be on the bench waiting for your turn. There's something about the people on the pitch, as this comment mentions, maybe feeling resentful that somebody's having a rest. But we found that a lot of people on the bench were just desperate to get on. We're really unhappy about not being on. But I think there's something about understanding each other's perspectives and really getting those conversations going about what it might have felt like for each group and not making an assumption, as you said. I think that's quite important.
And the thing I would add to that, I suppose, is acknowledging the important role that both parties played in the organisation surviving or thriving, whatever that may be for the different organisation. So it's that both have played an important part in that.
We've got time for one more. I'm just thinking because we've got the chat and we've got the question box. I've just opened the question box. So how does the business deal with setting and assessing individual KPIs in the virtual world? I mean, setting KPIs is an interesting subject anyway for me, because I've always been a big fan of line of sight between what the organisation is trying to achieve at its highest level, and it is measurable, and then breaking into teams and then into smaller teams and into the individual themselves. And I think that in lots of ways it shouldn't be much different. Although I'm interested in people's experiences, but I just do wonder whether, again, role and goal clarity. What is the role of the person? What is the role of the team? What we're trying to do? And what's the goal? And in this new world, not having to redefine goals. So if you're not clear with your team goals, it's really difficult to set an individual KPI. And then you're into the conversation about what is the goal? What can we do as a team? What do I need you to do? And what do I need you to achieve? And a conversation. I mean, the goal setting is best when it's talked about and shared, and it's stretching but realistic to a point. And again, I think you've got to work a bit harder on that in the virtual world, but it should still be quite personal, because you can be sat with somebody talking about what works for them. And I think always with goal setting, a broad range of them, not just the very obvious hard KPIs that are measurable, but work harder at the ones. We're going to run out of time, aren't we, Adam?
No, I think I'm just going to say I'm conscious of time and making sure that we stick to the half an hour. So I think there's probably a couple of questions that we haven't had chance to get to there, but we certainly will as part of the follow-up activity. So the last thing to say is obviously just a massive thank you for joining us for that half an hour. I know it's a whirlwind sort of stop and tour of all things motivation, but hopefully there's been something in there for you to take away. As always, we'd love your feedback. If there's any questions that is prompted, so as you move away from the laptop, feel free to contact us on social, and we'll be sure to follow up to answer those questions and to let you know about future events. So thanks a lot for your time, and thanks, Adrian, for all your insight.
No worries. No, thanks for being online with us.